Ever notice how every guy you meet seems to be performing a character they didn't consciously choose? Like they're reading from a script written thousands of years ago and nobody told them they could improvise. You're at a party right now, scanning the room. That guy holding court by the snack table, making pronouncements about market trends like his opinion shapes reality. You're watching the king archetype in action. He doesn't even realize he's playing a role. Now, shift your gaze to the corner, where someone's quietly observing, taking mental notes, waiting for the perfect moment to drop some obscure knowledge that'll blow everyone's mind. That's the sage, and he's been rehearsing that contribution since he walked in. Here's the twist nobody mentions in all those self-help books and podcast episodes. These 12 archetypes, the king, the father, the warrior, the magician, the lover, the sage, the explorer, the creator, the hero, the rebel, the jester, and the caregiver aren't personality types you choose. They're frequencies you tune into depending on what the situation demands. Imagine you're suddenly responsible for a team project at work. Watch how quickly you switch channels from explorer energy, curious, wandering, asking questions to warrior mode when deadlines loom. You didn't decide to change. The context hijacked your operating system. The father shows up when someone needs guidance, and you suddenly hear yourself giving advice like your own dad. The lover emerges when vulnerability feels safe enough to risk. These aren't costumes you put on. They're more like programs running in the background of your consciousness. But here's where it gets weird. Society has spent the last few decades basically telling men that half these archetypes are toxic, while the other half make you a doormat. The warrior becomes toxic masculinity, while the caregiver makes you weak, apparently. So what happens? Guys end up stuck in one or two safe modes, never accessing the full range. You get men who are all jester, deflecting every serious moment with humor because they never learned to activate their sage. Or guys perpetually in hero mode, exhausting themselves trying to save everyone while their inner caregiver quietly suffocates. The magician archetype is probably the most misunderstood of the bunch. This isn't about pulling rabbits from hats or reading tarot cards. It's about transformation, seeing patterns others miss, understanding that changing your perspective literally changes your reality. Think about the last time you reframed a terrible situation into an opportunity. That was your inner magician at work, alchemizing lead into gold. But most guys never consciously develop this one because it requires admitting that perception is malleable, that your story about yourself might just be that, a story. The creator energy is what kicks in when you're building something from nothing, whether that's a business, a garden, or just a really excellent sandwich. It's the archetype that finds joy in the process, not just the outcome. Yet, somewhere along the way, we decided that creating stuff is only valuable if it generates income or Instagram likes. Now picture the rebel archetype, the one that questions every rule and authority just to see if it deserves respect. This energy gets a bad reputation because it's inconvenient, disruptive, uncomfortable, but without it, you're just following scripts written by people who died centuries ago. The explorer is that restless energy that won't let you settle, that keeps whispering, but what's over that next hill? This is the guy who quits the stable job to travel, who pivots careers at 40, who refuses to accept that this is all there is. Modern life tries to medicate this archetype into submission with mortgages and streaming subscriptions. Here's the uncomfortable truth hiding in plain sight. You're probably overusing 2 or 3 of these archetypes while completely neglecting the others. And that imbalance is creating the exact problems you keep trying to solve with the same limited toolkit. The guy who leads every interaction with warrior energy wonders why his relationships feel like battlefields. The perpetual jester can't understand why nobody takes him seriously. The all-king, all-the-time dude is mystified when people call him controlling. What's fascinating is watching how these archetypes show up in pop culture and nobody notices the pattern. Every superhero movie is basically just different combinations of these 12 energies bouncing off each other. Iron Man is creator rebel magician. Captain America is warrior father hero. Thor literally goes from king to explorer to warrior across his character arc. The lover archetype gets reduced to romance and sex, which completely misses the point. This is about passion, connection, appreciation of beauty, being fully present in your senses. It's the energy that makes you stop and actually taste your coffee instead of just using it as fuel. When you suppress the lover because you're afraid of seeming soft or emotional, you don't just lose romance. You lose the ability to be moved by art, to feel genuine excitement, to connect deeply with anything. You become a ghost piloting a meat suit through an increasingly gray existence. The hero archetype is probably the most overvalued in modern masculinity. Every marketing campaign, every movie, every motivational speaker is trying to activate your inner hero. Overcome, conquer, triumph, until you're completely exhausted from performing heroism on a stage nobody's watching. Meanwhile, the caregiver sits in the shadows, dismissed as feminine energy, unavailable to men who desperately need to learn how to nurture themselves and others. This is the archetype that knows when to put down the sword and pick up the bandage. The father energy is distinct from the king, though they get confused constantly. The king makes decisions, sets boundaries, creates order. The father guides, teaches, protects, provides wisdom earned through experience. You need both, but they serve different functions in your psychological ecosystem. Watch what happens in a crisis situation. Some guys immediately go full warrior, ready to fight or flee. Others activate the father, trying to keep everyone calm and thinking clearly. Neither response is wrong, but only having access to one limits your effectiveness. The sage sits back and observes, synthesizes, understands. This is the archetype that reads philosophy at 3 a.m, that notices patterns across decades, that speaks up once but makes it count. In a culture obsessed with constant content creation and hot takes, the sage's patient wisdom feels almost revolutionary. But here's the trick that nobody tells you in the archetype workshops and weekend retreats. These aren't separate personalities competing for dominance. They're more like instruments in an orchestra, and you're supposed to be the conductor. The problem is, most guys never learn to conduct. They just let whichever archetype is loudest at the moment take over completely. So they swing wildly from warrior to lover to jester without any coherent integration. What if you could consciously choose which archetype the situation actually needs? Deploy the magician when you need to reframe and transform. The warrior when boundaries must be defended. The caregiver when someone needs genuine support without agenda. This isn't about becoming all 12 archetypes perfectly. It's about recognizing which ones you've been neglecting, which ones you're hiding behind, which ones might actually serve you better than your default settings. The real game is integration. Can you be the king who isn't afraid to activate his caregiver? The warrior who knows when to switch to sage mode and just observe? The creator who can tap into rebel energy when the rules need breaking? Because here's what nobody wants to admit out loud. The fully integrated man who can access all 12 archetypes as needed is basically unstoppable. Not because he's conquered anything, but because he's stopped fighting himself. The archetypes aren't your enemy or your destiny. They're tools, frequencies, possibilities. And you've been walking around with a full toolkit while only using the same 2 wrenches over and over.